For decades, the story seemed settled. Aboriginal Australians arrived on the continent somewhere around 40 to 45,000 years ago, toward the tail end of humanity's Great Migration from Africa. They were treated as a footnote, a late chapter. The tools to prove otherwise simply did not exist. But when researchers finally read the genetic code locked inside a century-old strand of hair, the story did not just shift, it shattered. And what replaced it is a timeline so deep, so resilient, that it forces us to rethink what the word civilization even means. The old consensus held together for a long time, and not without reason. Radiocarbon dating, the workhorse of 20th century archaeology, has a hard ceiling. After about 50,000 years, carbon-14 has almost entirely decayed. Any site older than that essentially goes silent under the standard test. So when excavations across Australia kept producing dates clustered around 37 to 40,000 years ago, nobody questioned the pattern. It looked like a wall. And behind that wall, scientists assumed there was nothing. The evidence appeared to match. Stone tools recovered from rock shelters in Arnhem Land, shell middens along the coasts, charcoal fragments from ancient hearths, they all seemed to converge on the same window. 40,000 years, give or take. Textbooks printed the number, lectures repeated it. The assumption quietly hardened into fact. But assumptions are only as strong as the methods behind them, and radiocarbon dating was never designed to see past its own limit. It does not measure when humans arrived. It measures when carbon atoms decayed. Any site older than 50,000 years simply disappears from the radiocarbon record, the way a radio signal fades beyond the range of a transmitter. The absence of a date was mistaken for the absence of people. There was a second blind spot. Early excavations in Australia were small. Researchers dug narrow test pits, sometimes no wider than a phone booth, straight down through sandy deposits. In loose sediments, artifacts can shift. Termites tunnel through the earth, creating channels that let objects drift. Footsteps over millennia press tools deeper into older layers. When dates older than 50,000 years did surface from a site called Malakunanja in the 1980s, skeptics argued the tools had simply sunk into layers where they did not belong. Without the technology to verify exact positions, those objections could not be definitively answered. The older dates were shelved, treated as anomalies rather than signals. And there was a third barrier, perhaps the most consequential. Not a scientific one, a human one. Until 2011, the entire genetic record for Aboriginal Australians came from a single source. One lock of hair, donated to a British anthropologist by an Aboriginal man from Western Australia in the early 1920s. One sample, for an entire continent. One tuft of hair, standing in for the oldest continuous population outside Africa. Then Eske Willerslev, a geneticist at the University of Copenhagen, extracted DNA from that same hair, 100 years after it was collected. The strands were fragile, broken into fragments averaging just 69 base pairs. But the genome, even degraded, told a clear story. The man's ancestors had separated from other human populations between 64 and 75,000 years ago. That was not a minor correction. It was a gap of 24,000 years between the Aboriginal dispersal and the migration that eventually gave rise to Europeans and Asians. The ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were not late arrivals. They were the first modern humans to leave Africa and successfully settle an entirely new continent. That finding landed in the journal Science. But it was just the first tremor. What came next would require reading the genetic history not of one individual, but of an entire civilization. In 2012 and 2015, teams returned to Madjedbebe, a sandstone overhang at the base of the Arnhem Land escarpment in Australia's Northern Territory. The shelter had been excavated before, in 1973 and again in 1989, each time pushing the dates further back. But the older results were contested. Critics argued that sandy deposits allowed artifacts to shift downward through trampling or termite activity, making them appear older than they actually were. The site remained stuck in academic limbo. Excavators recorded three-dimensional coordinates for more than 10,000 artifacts using a laser total station, pinpointing each object's position to millimeter accuracy. Instead of dating bulk sediment samples, geochronologist Zenobia Jacobs measured thousands of individual sand grains using optically stimulated luminescence, a technique that reveals the last time a grain of quartz saw sunlight. Grain by grain, the picture sharpened. The deepest artifact layer contained polished axe heads, seed-grinding tools, and ochre crayons, including the world's oldest known edge-ground hatchets, and the first recorded use of reflective pigment. The date for the lowest occupation layer converged on 65,000 years ago. That number did not just rewrite Australian prehistory, it rewrote the entire timeline of human dispersal from Africa. But the real revolution came not from the ground, it came from saliva. In 2016, after years of careful negotiation with Aboriginal community elders, representative organizations, and the ethical board of Griffith University, Willersleff's team sequenced the complete genomes of 83 Aboriginal Australians and 25 Papuans from the New Guinea highlands. It was the first major genomic study of Aboriginal Australians ever conducted. And if you're finding this discovery as compelling as I think it is, subscribe so you don't miss future stories like this one. What the genomes revealed overturned nearly every assumption the field had operated on. Aboriginal Australians and Papuans had diverged from Eurasian populations at least 51,000 years ago, roughly 16,000 years before the ancestors of Europeans and Asians became genetically distinct from each other. While the forebears of every other non-African population were still somewhere in the Middle East, the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were already crossing open ocean. Reaching the ancient supercontinent of Sahul, which joined modern Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea before rising seas split them apart, required at least 8 to 10 deliberate sea crossings between islands. One of those crossings spanned open water for more than 100 kilometers. No drifting, no accidents. These were planned voyages, among the earliest evidence of seafaring anywhere on Earth. Then came a finding no one had predicted. Buried in the Aboriginal genome sat a 4% genetic signal from an unknown hominin. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, though a distant relative of them. A species that has never been identified from any fossil, any bone fragment, any cave deposit. A ghost in the code. The ancestors of Aboriginal Australians encountered this mystery population somewhere near Sahul, interbred with them, and carried the evidence forward for tens of thousands of years, hidden in plain sight inside their own DNA. Meanwhile, the Denisovan signal told its own story. Aboriginal Australians and Papuans carry roughly 4 to 5% Denisovan DNA, significantly more than any mainland Asian population. But the Denisovan variants found in Aboriginal Australians do not match the Denisovans from Siberia's Altai Mountains. They appear to come from a different Denisovan population, one that lived somewhere in Southeast Asia and has never been found. Here is what the evidence shows. Aboriginal Australians descend from the first wave of humans to leave Africa. They split from Eurasians earlier than any other non-African group. They crossed open ocean using planned navigation. They interbred with at least 2 archaic human species, one of which remains completely unknown. And then they did something no other population on Earth has done. They stayed. Consider what that sea crossing alone implies. Reaching Sahul was not like walking across a land bridge. Even during the last ice age, when sea levels dropped by 140 meters, deep oceanic troughs separated Southeast Asia from Australia. Travelers would have had to build watercraft, load them with supplies, and set out across open water toward a horizon that offered no visible destination. They did this not once, but repeatedly, across at least 8 to 10 separate channels. And a 2025 study confirmed they used 2 distinct routes, one from the north through the Philippines and Sulawesi, and one from the south through Timor. These were separate streams of the same migration, arriving at roughly the same time, 60,000 years ago. That is 30,000 years before the cave paintings at Lascaux, 45,000 years before the first Egyptian pyramid. In 2017, Alan Cooper at the University of Adelaide led a study that analyzed mitochondrial DNA from 111 hair samples collected during anthropological expeditions between 1928 and the 1970s. Mitochondrial DNA passes exclusively through the maternal line, which means it traces an unbroken chain of mothers stretching back to the founding population. The results showed that after arriving in northern Australia, people spread rapidly within about 1,500 to 2,000 years along both the east and west coasts, meeting somewhere in South Australia. What the evidence rules out is drift. This was not a slow, random dispersal. The coastal colonization was fast, deliberate, and geographically structured from the beginning. And after that initial spread, something extraordinary happened. Communities stayed put, not for centuries, not for millennia, for 50,000 years. The mitochondrial data showed that regional genetic patterns established shortly after arrival have persisted to this day. Communities have remained in the same discrete geographic areas across ice ages, droughts, and sea level changes that reshaped the entire continent. Cooper called it unlike anything seen in any other human population on Earth. What this implies about social organization is staggering. Maintaining distinct regional populations for 50,000 years requires systems, knowledge networks, territorial boundaries, and cultural practices strong enough to survive climatic upheaval that wiped out populations elsewhere. It implies a depth of social coordination that predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates everything we typically associate with complex societies by tens of thousands of years. A 2023 study published in Nature drove the point deeper. Researchers at the National Center for Indigenous Genomics analyzed the genomes of 159 individuals from 4 remote communities and found the highest proportion of previously undescribed genetic variation seen anywhere outside Africa. Up to 25% of their genetic variation was unique to Indigenous Australians. The genetic difference between 2 Aboriginal communities, separated by 1,400 kilometers, was comparable to the difference between populations in Cambodia and northeast China, separated by 4,500 kilometers. These are not subtle distinctions. This is deep, ancient structure, preserved within a single continent. Not everyone agrees on every detail, and genuine scientific tension remains. The dating of Madjedbebe at 65,000 years is still debated. A 2020 study argued that the luminescence dates may be unreliable, citing termite disturbance and the possibility that artifacts migrated downward through sandy deposits. Supporters counter that the 2015 excavation addressed exactly this problem, with artifact refits, stone tools that broke apart and were found in the same stratigraphic layer, demonstrating the deposit had not been significantly disturbed. The number of migration waves is also unresolved. Most large-scale genetic studies support a single founding population. But a 2019 study identified multiple deeply divergent Denisovan ancestries in Papuans, suggesting the picture of archaic interbreeding is far more complex than a single encounter. And the question of whether a small fraction of Aboriginal and Papuan ancestry traces to an earlier, separate migration out of Africa, predating the main dispersal, has not been conclusively settled. One study estimated this earlier contribution at about 2% of the Papuan genome. The mystery of the ghost-like internal migration adds another layer. Around 4,000 years ago, a population expansion swept from northeast Australia across the continent, transforming language so profoundly that 90% of Aboriginal communities today speak languages from the same family, Pama-Nyungan. The cultural and linguistic impact was massive, but the genetic impact was almost invisible. As Willerslev described it, a few immigrants appeared in different villages and communities, changed the way people spoke and thought, and then disappeared, like ghosts. Today, in a sandstone overhang in Arnhem Land, ochre crayons sit in museum cases behind glass. They are 65,000 years old. Someone ground pigment there, mixed reflective mica into paint, and marked stone walls in a shelter that would be continuously occupied for longer than any other known site on Earth. If this hidden chapter of our shared history fascinated you, subscribe to explore more stories. The evidence is only now revealing. The DNA says these people were not primitive wanderers who stumbled onto an empty continent. They were navigators who crossed open ocean, geneticists' best evidence for the earliest seafaring in human history, survivors who outlasted ice ages that erased entire populations elsewhere, and communities so deeply rooted in place that their genetic signatures have not moved in 50,000 years. No other population on Earth can make that claim. And the Corna elder Lewis O'Brien, one of the original hair donors in the Adelaide study, put it simply. Aboriginal people have always known they have been on their land since the start of their time. Now the science is catching up. So here is the question that remains. If Aboriginal Australians built the world's oldest continuous civilization without agriculture, without cities, without any of the markers we have been taught to look for, what else have we been measuring? Wrong.